First of all, I'm very glad that I'm here for the first time. I was an observer last year to this conference, and I found it particularly interesting, so that's why I'm very glad that I'm here, because I'm very interested about the things related to the role of religion in society, about church state law and things like this. So I'm deeply honored to have this presentation today. I'm interested in the secularization issues, which I found particularly challenging because none of the theories that were discussed cover the many issues that are connected with secularization. When I started with the title, New Approaches, I said it's almost impossible to have all the approaches, because it's many authors are writing about how to understand secularization in different contexts, different European, American, national contexts, and so on. But I would like to present you a very quite new book of a French sociologist, Olivier Roy, who is teaching at the European University Institute in Florence, and who is asking the same question: if Europe is still Christian or not, and how can we define the role of religion in Europe right now? So first of all, I would like to develop some of the thoughts that are part of this book, and then I would like to connect them with a very recent study that was released last Friday by Pew Research Center, related to the connection between the text church and the level of religious feelings in the countries that are practicing text church. So the basic assumption of this French author is that Christian identity still exists, but it's not faith in Jesus Christ. And this explains why we have many religious people in Europe, but if they are asked if they believe in God, they have very non-concludent answers. If they are asked if they are practicing faith, not many of them are practicing faith every day or every week. So, for example, in France, there are only 38% of people who believe that there is a God somehow, and only 10% are going regularly to the church. And even in some countries that had religion at their foundation, like Spain, we have only 13% of the people going regularly to church. Of course, we have more people that say they do believe in God. So there is a Christian identity, and this is a basic assumption of this author, that is going beyond the end of the faith. Last year I published a book. It was an interview with the German writer and theologian Reginald Schladner. And I asked him, which is representative of one of the small communities in Romania, the German one, because a lot of the people from this minority immigrated to Germany. And I asked him what will happen after the death of the last survivors, last people who are part of this community. And his answer was a surprise for me. he told me that the religion will be encapsulated in the language, the German language that many Romanians like to learn in the school. And he said it is also connected with the, let's say, the wish to have a spiritual view, to go beyond the borders of the language. And I found it particularly interesting because Olivier was speaking about the same issue. What will happen after the end of the faith? And it's a lot of studies about secularization in Europe shows that Europeans still believe in the social role of the churches, still believe in the churches as a way to encounter other people. So they still believe in a certain role of the church, even if they don't know they don't go regularly to the church. You know very well the thesis of self-secularization of the church, which I found it particularly interesting. It means that, according to Marcel Gauchet, which said that Christianism, it's a religion to go out of the religion. So a certain self-secularization is also even at the basis of Christianity, which I found particularly true, and this is very different from other religions that do not think that going out of the world is the main aspect of this religion. And self-secularization played a significant role in Europe, in the case of the Catholic Church, in the case of the Protestant churches, especially after Vatican Council, after the Second Vatican Council in the 60s. So the church entered into the modernity by self-secularizing itself. Is it also true in the case of the Orthodox religion? You may say that it is not the case. You may say that the Orthodox religion is close to, let's say, to the inner behavior of people, so they are not influenced by this wave of self-secularization. But we have recent researches that shows Orthodoxy is also affected by this self-secularization. Because of self-secularization, we saw the end of a political project, for example, in Europe, the end of the Christian democracy. There is no need for parties that take into account the religious marker. Because of this self-secularization, we have a new phenomenon like populism, which Olivier Roy says it's a folklorization of a religion. He says populist leaders do not believe in God, they are not anti-clericals, they are not against the church, but they are using very well the religious argument, even if they don't believe in a particular role of religion, even if they are not convinced about the role of religion. Think about Matteo Salvini, who wants to depict himself as a Christian man, but he wants to be depicted by the others. He wants to that the others will say that he goes to church and that he believes in God and so on. He launched this, let's say, issue of Christian symbols in the public space, but without using, let's say, the religious rhetoric, without being serious about religion. So, religion is under attack from secularists, from people who believe that there's no place for religion in the public space, but also from the part of the people who believe that there is a role of the religion, but they don't understand very well the role of the religion. And we see some very interesting developments in Europe right now. For example, in the US it was a dispute about the role of the creche, about the Christmas depicting of nativity, and some town halls fighting to keep that scene in the public. But in some European countries, the reaction was like that the issue has been made instrumental for political purposes and have nothing to do with the Christmas celebration. And therefore, even the clergy was against this kind of depicting Christmas. They're saying, instead of fighting for a creche or something, we can use our time, we can use better our time in order to convince people to go to church during the Christmas. And it's also true for the cross in the school. Now it seems to be, according to the last decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, it seems to be more a cultural marker than a religious one. That's why the cases were successful, because it was argued that the cross is a cultural marker, that it's part of European history, that is part of European identity. So people who insisted on the religious role of the cross were not successful. So we see a kind of secularization also regarding religious symbols. We cannot feel very well this secularization, because we do believe that there is a fight in keeping these symbols, but they also part of the secularization in Europe. And as I said, there is a recent study about how Europeans see the church tax, and I would like to present just some of the conclusions of the study. So, most people back church-state separation, even while many willingly pay the church tax. So, we believe normally that there is a distinction between people who like to pay church tax, where there is such an opportunity. In Romania, there is not. And it was the whole discussion. It was a very interesting discussion when the law on religious freedom was discussed in 2006, if there is the appropriate moment to introduce or not. It was considered that this is not the appropriate moment, but all the participants, all the churches said at a certain moment in time, we will keep this idea, and we think that it could be an option. So they don't said we exclude totally this option. So church tax does exist in 6 countries: Austria, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Sweden, and Switzerland. So if they are asked if religion should be kept separate from government policies, they are saying yes. The majority are saying yes. And in the countries that don't have a church tax, there is also support for church-state separation. So they are asked, why you are paying this tax? And there are many different reasons that shows the level of secularization right now in Europe. So they said, yes, the religion should be kept separate from government policies, but the church is still relevant for social activities, and therefore by paying this tax, we contribute to a better involvement of the church in social affairs, even if the church is saying that more involvement in the social issues will bring more secularization. So it's a kind of paradox. Europeans are supporting the church in order to be more secularized. That's why there is a new concept to describe this, like secularized Christians. It's a kind of paradox. They are continue to be Christians. Yes, they do not lose the faith in God, but they are behaving like they support the way of secularization. We usually say that, for example, in Eastern Europe, people are believing, belonging, but not behaving. You know, there was this issue of belonging to a church and believing from Grace Davy, but now the sociologists of religion introduce a new factor like behaving. And usually say yes, in Eastern Europe there is not so much secularization, but the way people behave outside the Christian principles show that it's very good to use to use the free terms like belonging, behaving, and believing. Yes. So what people who don't pay the church tax are saying about the role of the religion in society? Well, there is a certain surprise. They share the same belief that the church tax is good for the church to be more involved in social activities and so on. But surprise, they are saying that they don't want that the church will go deeper into this self-secularization process. So in fact, the biggest paradox is that people who are disaffiliated from a church and don't want to pay the church tax somehow are more religious than the others, even if there is no further research on this issue. And it's very interesting to go deeper into the reasons why people do not want to pay church tax. And in the meantime, we see people who are recent baptized, they are recent members of the Christian community that are willing to pay immediately the church tax. Why? Because it's a marker of being recognized as part of the community. Even if they don't believe as the one who are baptized Christians, they consider that being part of the community, it's a kind of social status. So secularization is widespread in Europe, it's true, but most people in the region still identify as Christian. So if we introduce this difference between secularized Christians and Christians who are true believers, we can better explain the situation in Europe. But most people identify as Christian. Amongst them, a few regularly attend church. So attendance to church is not related to secularization and to the beliefs of people. And this is why it's very important to speak also about the issue of behaving like a Christian, not only about believing or belonging, but also about behaving. Behaving means to go to the church and to practice, let's say, the Christian virtues in daily life. The majority of the people in the countries in Europe, they are saying it's very interesting that they would willing to accept other religions So the level of tolerance in Europe, it's still high. And I think, and this is my theory, this is my perspective, that the high level of tolerance that existed all the time in Europe and still exists today explains why religion have been kept as an identity. So if we are Europeans, if they are asked if they are willing to help a Muslim or a Jew or something like this, they answer more positively even than Americans that share better, let's say, religion practices. And it is also a paradox. But it is explained also by the positive role of the religious tolerance that existed, I think, all the time in Europe. But the prevailing view, and this is the end of my presentation, is that religion should be kept separate from government policies. It's not a willingness to support any kind of separation between state and church, but to keep out the religion of government policies. So people in Europe do not prefer that the governments are instrumentalizing religion. They are using religion in order to have their own political purposes. Yes. So it is not an argument for saying that we have to develop more on a certain model of separation, but there are also Europeans that are supporting they show very high support for, let's say, the state investing in religion, but they have a clear view on how this money should be used. And the most striking fact about secularization in Europe is that unaffiliated people in European countries are comparable to unaffiliated people in the US, but Americans that are not affiliated to a religion are more religious than the European counterparts. I mean, in Europe, if you go outside of a religion, you are becoming, let's say, an enemy of the religion. But in the US, if for certain reasons you go out of a certain religion, you are still sympathetic to a religion. This is a paradox, and to this paradox I would like to add the one that I already presented, that unaffiliation is not similar, have nothing to do with not paying church tax. People can consider themselves still part of the church, but to be in reality unaffiliated. And the vice versa is also true. People can feel they can be outside the church, but behave like being part of the church. So the issue of affiliation, of behaving, of belonging to a church, it's something unique in Europe. And I would like to say, and this is the challenge for further research, that these are new issues in the 20th until, let's say, some decades ago. There was not only the discussion was not relevant, but also the reality was not like it is today. And this is why this puzzle in Europe is not very easy to understand. This is why we all the time need new instruments in order to find what about religion? And this is why the research on the church text, I think, is very relevant to discover another phase of secularization, self-secularization, and religion in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention. So please, if you have questions, come here for yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I'm very interested in your topics, and I think secularization is the topic that we should discuss everywhere. Yes, at every conference maybe. But I have a question, some kind of. You said that Europe and particularly Romania, yes, are witnessing the process of secularization.
Not particularly Romania. No. I didn't refer to Romania's particular case. No.
You say a little bit. Could you please explain? Could you please maybe note it in general? What are the criteria of process of secularization? In general, from philosophical point of view, maybe. And is there some difference between theological explanation and philosophical explanation of this process? And I wonder what is the church taxes. It's very interesting. If you can, please explain.
The church tax means that if you are a member of a church, you pay a certain tax. An official tax, a private one. You're not obliged. It's not a state tax.
Like donation.
Donation, yes. But if you are, the church could impose a certain tax, which was the practice in the Protestant churches. But also in other countries, they found it very particularly interesting to have this church tax. For example, the first country that introduced, where the churches introduced such a church tax was Germany. And Catholic Church uses a certain perspective on a church tax. Protestant churches are using another perspective. So the state is not helping the collection of taxes, that's obvious, yes. But of course, if you are paying the tax, you have certain fiscal advantages, but not so many, but nevertheless. The most interesting system is in Italy, where you can pay, you can redirect 2% of your taxes to free entities for a church, and you have to indicate the church, for development activities, let's say, and for I think for cultural activities, something like this. But it doesn't mean that if you choose to invest in, let's say, cultural, spiritual activities, it doesn't mean that your money doesn't go to a church, but it goes to a specific activity of the church. Well, it's more complicated than I can present in few words, but well, the systems are on the way, and as I said, you will think why people prefer in Germany to pay 8% of their revenue to a certain church. We thought that disaffiliation will be in huge numbers, but in fact, people prefer still prefer to pay such tax, and people that there is a much more diverse situation. People who don't pay the tax, but still they are feeling like being affiliated to the church. People who pay the church tax only to be recognized as part of a social group, let's say, of a privileged social group, as they think. So this is another issue to speak about church tax. But I try to find which is the correlation between the evolution of church tax and secularization. And there are some connections, but not the ones that we might think. We have to, as I said, we have to go deeper into the reasons of people who are paying or who are not paying, and what does it mean for the whole situation in Europe. Regarding your first question, I'm not a philosopher, so I don't know the philosophical implication of secularization. But once again, everything that you can say about secularization, you can say quite the opposite, and it's also true. If you are saying that there is a trend towards secularization in the world, you may find arguments for showing that this is a trend towards desecularization. If you may say that Europe is the most secularized region in the world, if you are using other indicators, you will see that the situation is not like this. You see, so what is fascinating in this is that you have many theories. That's why I choose to speak about new methodological approaches, because there is always something new, and the complexity of the facts cannot be explained by a single theory. Max Weber thought that we are going in a linear direction like secularization, but it was shown that reality is much more complex than that. Please.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I just have a small comment and question. So regarding church tax, just to respond to Olga question, I just come from Germany, and in Germany it looks like if you don't pay the tax, then you are not able to be baptized, you are not able to be buried in the cemetery, and I think that is the reason.
No, excuse me. I know better the situation. It was like this before, but they changed, they relaxed the rules. They just relaxed the rules. I know very well what you are talking about. It was at the beginning when the tax was introduced, it was like this. So the church was very much in favor of denying every kind of service to the people. But now they are more relaxed, let's say, not in the sense that they offer, let's say, to anyone, but anyway, yeah.
That's the people that is believed, that is our neighbors.
Yeah. It's a subjective belief of the people. It is true that it's a subjective belief of the people who pay church tax, that they have an insurance that the church will take care of them in these moments of life. That's true, but it is the difference between objective and subjective evidence about this. Yes.
And you, as far as you are a theologian, right?
No. I'm a lawyer and a political scientist. Yes.
Because my question was whether you see some theological reasons, so tendencies within theology itself that leads to secularization.
No. This is what I said. That it's obvious there is a certain self-secularization trend, and we see it from in the Catholic Church. It's obvious. It is a wonderful research made by a French sociologist, Guillaume Couchet, who was published last year, and it proves quite well that the secularization was not so intense when the law on laïcité was adopted, but was very intense in the 60s, in the 70s, just in the period of just after the council, after the Second Vatican Council. And it offers significant proofs in order to show this relationship between the fact that the church itself believed that let's have other rules that are more friendly, yes, towards our people, and the fact that people just get out of the church because they consider what they found attractive in the church, it's the system of values. They still share the same values as before Second Vatican Council, but they do not believe that the religion is at the basis of these values, you know. So self-secularization is a trend, and as I said, it is not limited only to the Catholic Church. In this book, Olivier Roy made a significant remark. He says that until now, the Pope Francis made more than half of the visits outside Europe, which is different from other heads of the Catholic Church. Why he did this? Because he believed that now Catholicism have the weight, let's say, in Asia, in Latin America, but not in Europe. So there are some trends that are developing very fast, but we cannot see it if you look only if you look at the whole, let's say, period of a certain head of the church, you know. Okay, so if there are not other questions, we can. You have a very small one just before lunch, because I think that everyone wants to go to lunch and we can discuss there better. But 1 minute, I think it's.
Thank you. So I completely agree with you when you say that there is a Christianity as a religion, and for many people Christianity is first of all an identity. In Russia, I guess it's the same situation for many people. So at the same time, when we speak about Europe, as an example, many people say that there is a crisis of identity in European countries. And for example, a very contradictory French thinker, Alain de Benoit, he says that it's not just the crisis of identity in Europe. This crisis is rather complicated by the other groups, other religious groups like Muslims, for example, that still have very profound identity. And the question is, identity helps to play on equal ground with other players. And when you say that government policy shouldn't support the religion, I ask you a question. Do you think...
So this is the perception, the general perception, the majority perception, yes.
Do you think that government policy should support Christianity not as a religion, but as an identity?
Yes, this is the main dispute right now. As I said, if religion is still an identity or there is still a religion. So, and this is the trap where we are right now, because, as I said, we are going suddenly in some fights of the church, and the church says, "But this is our fight to have the cross in the class." But in fact, it does help to the perception of these symbols that not being religious but being cultural. So it helps to a shift in identity. But we rather believe that is not the case. You see, this is, of course, identity issue is central right now. It's central in all the disputes. And just think about this issue. What will happen after the last member of a small community like Germans in Romania will die, if the religion will survive? And the answer is yes, but in other forms than were used before. We are used to see people going to the church. Maybe we will not see it, but we will see other people going to the same churches in order to better know the religion that has died, let's say, with the last survivors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join me in thanking Professor Carp.